Hello and welcome to the Providence College podcast. I'm your host, Liz Kay, and I'm joined by producer Chris Judge of the class of 2005. Here on the Providence College podcast, we bring you interesting stories from the Fryer family. This week, we're talking with Dr. Eric Lebel, a member of the class of 2015. As a biochemistry and music double major, he was just as likely to be found in either a research lab or playing the organ in St. Dominic Chapel. Lebel got his doctorate at Stanford University in Environmental Earth System Science. He now serves as senior scientist at PSC Healthy Energy, a nonprofit research institute based in Oakland. He and his colleagues recently made national headlines with their research study demonstrating that gas appliances such as stoves leak methane and other gases, even when turned off. Eric, it's great to talk to you.
Thanks for having me, Liz. Glad to be here.
So can you tell us a little bit more about your study? What did you and your colleagues set out to examine?
Yeah, so we looked at methane emissions from gas stoves, and this is part of a bigger project looking at methane emissions from gas appliances in homes. This research started several years ago when my advisor was a part of a project in Boston, very close to Providence. You guys may know where that is. But looking at the methane emissions from the sources of the city, and then also looking at methane emissions from the city as a whole, from a citywide perspective. And they found that there was quite a bit more methane that was being emitted than was adding up from the different sources. So one of the hypotheses is that buildings, specifically residences and other commercial buildings and industrial facilities, may be emitting methane and hasn't been measured yet. So as part of my PhD, I set out to help answer that question by measuring methane from different appliances in homes. And so we did a project on water heaters, and now this project based looking at natural gas stoves.
And so why is methane such a problem?
Methane is a problem specifically from a climate impact because it's a stronger greenhouse gas than carbon dioxide, especially over shorter timescales. And the methane is a lot stronger than carbon dioxide pound for pound. Over a 20-year timescale, for instance, methane has been shown to be 86 times stronger than carbon dioxide and 34 times over a 100-year time scale. So we're mainly interested in methane. It's as a short-term greenhouse gas. We can eliminate about a quarter of the radiative forcing with the total greenhouse gas impact just by looking at methane alone. So it is the second most important greenhouse gas after carbon dioxide.
And tell us about your findings. What did you and your colleagues find out?
So from the natural gas stoves, we found that the interesting thing that we found was that methane is leaked from stoves even while the stove is off. We found that 3/4 of the total emissions from the natural gas stoves came from this off period, which we found to be pretty interesting. There's also a fair amount of methane emissions that happen while you're turning the stove on, that click, click, click sound when you ignite the burner. And sometimes you can smell gas from that phase. And we've measured that, and we're able to put a number on how much gas is being emitted during that phase. And also while the stove is on, while the oven is on, all these times we found that there was some amount, in most circumstances, there was some amount of gas being emitted from the stove.
And what about health impacts from these gases that are being emitted? Is methane a problem?
Yeah, methane per se is not an issue from the concentrations that we were measuring from the stoves, but methane is more of a concern from a safety perspective. As it can be explosive at 5% concentration by volume. But the concentrations that we've been seeing in kitchens are not exceeding that threshold at all. However, that's not to say that this can't happen. This is why gas companies put odorants in gas, and that gives it that rotten egg smell. Without these extra compounds, they're sulfur-based compounds, mercaptans. Without these extra compounds, you wouldn't be able to smell natural gas in your house, but they put these compounds in so that you can detect concentrations of gas in your house. So if you ever smell gas in your house, it's always a good idea to call the gas company ASAP to have them come take a look to make sure that there isn't a leak in your house, or that the leak is not hazardous from a safety standpoint. But anyway, for most of the concentrations that we were measuring in homes and the leak rates that we were seeing, this is not an issue from a safety hazard standpoint. However, we did look at some other gases from stoves. We looked at nitrogen oxides, which is made up of nitric oxide and nitrogen dioxide, NO and NO2. And NO2 is a very well-known air toxin. It's a respiratory irritant and can cause asthma, difficulty breathing, and in some extreme cases, hospitalization. And it's mainly an issue it's more of an issue for children. And we found that it's known that burning gas will release these nitrogen oxides. And we found that this is not an exception for gas stoves. We were able to put a measurement on how much NO2 is being released from the gas stove, and found that the rates that we were seeing have the potential to exceed the Environmental Protection Agency's 1 hour outdoor standard of NO2 in certain burning conditions, depending on how many burners you have on and how big your kitchen is and what your ventilation is like in your kitchen.
So if you're one of the 40 million households with a gas stove, what should you do? Should we be replacing these appliances right away?
Yeah, the immediate thing to do is just anytime you're using your stove, whether or not you're boiling water or cooking, frying something up, you should always, always, always turn on the gas hood if you have one, the vent hood above the stove. And if you don't have a gas hood, then the best thing to do, maybe not when it's wintertime, but it's always good to open a window just to get some extra ventilation going on inside the kitchen, especially to reduce those local concentrations of nitrogen oxides that are being released from the stove, produced from burning the gas. If you're in the market for a new stove, I would definitely advocate to consider getting an electric stove. We know that in the future electricity is going to be cleaned up, so you're not even going to be saving just methane emissions, but over time, as more renewable energy is being added to the grid, it'll be less carbon impact too from the saved carbon dioxide emissions as well. And you may be thinking too that I don't like cooking on an electric stove. It's slow. It's a painful experience compared to a gas stove. But there is a newish technology out there. I say newish because it's actually been in Europe for several decades. We're just been slow on this side of the pond for implementing it, but it's called induction cooking. So it's still an electric stove, but the way it works is completely different. It creates a magnetic field, and it will heat the pot directly rather than creating a hot element for your pans to sit on. You have to have a magnetic pot for it to work, but it works great with cast irons and all kinds of other magnetic pots. You can test your pots just by using a fridge magnet to see if it sticks to the pot or not. But anyway, it's been shown that induction cooking is faster at boiling water than a gas stove, and it's also more sensitive, and you can even melt chocolate directly on the stove rather than needing a double boil. And it has other safety features too, like if you happen to leave your stove on and you don't have a pot there, nothing's going to happen. It just won't even get hot. So if it's more of a safety hazard or safety, it's good for safety if you have kids around or elderly folks at home that may leave the stove on by accident.
I had not heard that double boiling feature, Eric. That does sound attractive. Although, as a diehard gas stove fan, and when I'm cooking, I think that might push me over the edge.
You can even test it out too. They sell on Amazon. You can even just buy a single burner induction just to test it out. And I know that some towns in California, for instance, have programs. I saw one in San Diego, for instance, that you can just go to the local, I think it's the library, and just check one out for a couple of days to test it out and bring it to your house. I have an electric stove in my house. I rent, so I don't have a choice, but I still just got a test induction cooktop just to try it out myself too. So I just got that this morning.
Eric, are there any communities that are more significantly affected by these leaks from gas appliances that you found?
Yeah, it's more of an issue for people with smaller kitchens and people who use their stoves more often and have poor ventilation. And we've been finding that, or other studies have been finding that this is more of an issue with economically disadvantaged communities. If you consider that they're more likely to have smaller kitchens, they would be more likely to use their stove more often. And there's also more of a chance that they're not going to have as effective of a vent hood. So the vent hoods are only as effective as they're designed to be. And I've seen a lot of hoods even in California too, that as part of our other research that we've been doing, where you turn the vent hood on and it doesn't actually blow the air outside the house. It just blows it back into the room. So that's not going to help reduce NOx concentrations that much. They put a filter in the hood, but it's not as effective as blowing the air directly outside the house. So you can imagine that, especially in these economically disadvantaged communities, is that it's really important to make sure that we are not leaving them behind when we switch let's say that they're not left behind when we switch to electric appliances, and they can even benefit even more from these switch to electric appliances, because the electric appliances will not produce NOx just from turning the flame on. So there'll be less of a health impact inside their kitchen, for instance.
And I think there's all kinds of data about like the incidence of things like asthma among children and folks in communities that are often economically disadvantaged. And it sounds like this may be just one more factor that folks have to be aware of.
That's for sure. Yeah, definitely.
And so this is something that many municipalities are trying to work toward, right? Like trying to reduce the number of gas hookups in communities.
Yeah, that's right. So it's a big thing that's going on. It started in California. Berkeley, California was the first to do it, I think, back in 2019. And it's been spreading like wildfire. The most recent notable case was New York City banned banned gas in new construction for buildings less than 7 stories by 2023 and more than 7 stories by 2027. But the main theme about these gas bans is, for the most part, they have been on new construction, which makes a lot of sense, because we found from our study that methane leaks from the appliance. Other studies have found that methane leaks from, the gas pipes there's that in the neighborhood going up into the buildings. So if you build a new neighborhood of homes, not only are you saving the methane emissions from the appliance itself, but you're also saving it from the distribution of getting the gas to your house, which could also have leaks as well. And then as we keep scaling this up, more and more of these distribution systems will be eliminated, and there's less of a chance for methane to leak, and then of course the CO2 generation, CO2 production will be reduced as the grid gets cleaner. It's already cleaner than gas in California, or at least let's say that it's cleaner than average in California, for instance. So it makes a lot more sense to go electric now in California, but over time the grid will continue to be cleaned up and reduce the climate impact of home energy use.
So we can be able to still do the things that we need to do, like cook food in our homes, just with a more environmentally friendly source of energy.
That's right. Yeah. And hopefully a better cooking experience too, for the most part.
So you did this work as part of your doctorate. Please tell us more about Earth system science for any listeners who might not be familiar with it.
Yeah. So our program at Stanford was a very wide range of different research topics. So even within my lab, my office mate, who we started at the same time, have the same advisor, same PhD program, I was looking at methane emissions, and he was looking at carbon uptake and storage in tree roots. So completely different research topics, which also makes it kind of fun. But the overarching thing that we all looked at was looking at how climate change is affected by different systems in the Earth and over like a human time scale. So looking at specifically looking at like land use change, ocean acidification issues, ecology issues, looking at and specifically looking at how climate change is going to affect these issues over the next several decades. So that was the program I was in at Stanford. It was a lot of fun, being able to learn about all these different facets of Earth system science and looking at how climate change is really going to play a role in changing these systems, and how we can adapt and mitigate these systems and these effects of climate change in the next several years.
And why were you interested in a program like this? What attracted you?
I was just super interested after and applying the degree I got at PC, which was one of them was in biochemistry, but I really wanted to apply that chemistry knowledge to something that was earth science related. And the inspiration for that really came after an internship I did with NASA the summer before my senior year at PC, where we got to fly around in NASA's airplane and take air samples through the plane and take other data. We collected our own data and we were able to make a research project about that data in a span of 8 weeks, which I thought was really cool. And so I wanted to be able to continue to do that for a PhD program. And I was really interested in merging my love for being outdoors and being, going places and doing things hands-on with my chemistry background. So this project seemed to fit pretty well with me. My advisor was looking for somebody to look specifically at methane emissions when I applied. And I thought it was a good fit. And it was great to be able to go to the West Coast and go to grad school at Stanford.
You mentioned your unique combination of majors at PC, biochem and music. What led you to Providence College originally, and how did you choose this college?
There were a lot of different things. The main thing was that I got the sense that I would be able to pursue both of my passions while at PC. At the time, I still wasn't quite sure exactly what I wanted to do with my science background. I was also interested in math at the time. So I was really excited to see that, PC had a very strong chemistry, biochemistry, biology programs. And there would be lots of options for me to explore that side of my brain, while simultaneously having a very strong music program where I would be able to play the organ and take organ lessons and sing in choirs, which I did quite a lot of while I was at PC. And then having the liberal arts education too was a perk on top as well, where, being able to take advantage of these other classes that wouldn't be able to take at, say, an R1 research school, for instance. That I thought that was a great way to round out my education while at PC.
And did you do undergraduate research? Did you work with a faculty member on research?
I did. I worked with Dr. Cornelia for about a year to a year and a half. I was part of her phage program, so I wasn't the one who helped discover phages, but I did do some of the post analysis on some of the phages that she discovered with her students.
Well, so if you think back to your time at PC, are there any particular classes or experiences that you find that you're using in your work today?
Okay, now we're getting the tough questions. These are not the ones that the reporters have been asking me. For sure. I still use all my music classes. I still play the organ and do all that kind of stuff, and still talk about music theory and sing in choirs and stuff like that. But on the science side of things, I would say that I definitely do use a lot of my classes. Analytical chemistry is a big one. We're talking about working with us, putting samples into labs these days, and talking with the labs about how to run analyses and buying analyzers of our own to use and having to talk through the different specs of the analyzers, for instance. So that's been a very useful class specifically, but just having the background of organic chemistry and physical chemistry has been really useful. As I delve into different topics that maybe I haven't learned as much about at PC, like fluid mechanics, for instance, which became pretty important in talking about how to design this experiment to be able to collect these data in the first place. Right,
when you're measuring how gases disperse in a space, right?
Exactly. Yeah. But I think overall that the big thing that's been really useful is just having that science background, because being thrust into a PhD program like this and being able to know how to get the information and sift through it and be able to design an experiment that'll be successful in the end. Like a lot of these projects that I worked on as part of my PhD, we had to design our own methods for it, but there were some existing methods, but we had to adapt the methods for our particular use case and the data we were hoping to get out of it. So this method that we used with the stoves, to my knowledge, no one's ever measured a gas stove like that before. People have measured gas stoves before using other methods, which have their pros and cons. And we had a certain set of tools available to us that we wanted to be able to make sure that we incorporated. There were certain data points we wanted to get, in particular, in that estimate of how much stoves leak while they're off was really important to us. And so being able to design this method that would be able to answer that question, and be able to think through those different pitfalls and pros and cons to each of the different methods as we were designing them, and then we also had to test these out too. So like we can't just say, all right, we're going to use this method, let's go start measuring stoves right now. We had to go to we found a building on campus where we could do a controlled release of methane, where we would simulate a stove emission to make sure that the way we were doing it actually did work in real life. Or we in one case went to a house that had an electric stove and had no other gas in the house, and brought our cylinder of methane that we could do a controlled release and take the measurements there. So it was really fun being able to design that experiment. And it did bring me back to my times at PC, where I spent many an afternoon, usually 2 days a week in a lab, and having to do an experiment. and now I got to design and do it over a much longer period of time.
I wanted to ask you also about your music background and how you first got interested in music in the first place, and specifically in playing the organ. Where did that start?
That started back when I was in high school. Actually, it was eighth grade. I was taking lessons, piano lessons at a church. The church had just gotten a new music director, and I was his first student as he was there. And this church happens to have a very large organ. It's the First Presbyterian Church of Glens Falls, New York. It's like in the top 100 largest organs in the country, in the very small town in upstate New York. And one day I was taking lessons, and I was playing this easy piece. It was, well, I thought it was easy, I would think it's easy now, but I didn't think it was easy at the time. It's called Simple Gifts. And then one day the music director was asked me if I wanted to try the piece on the organ. And so I said, sure, I can try it on the organ. And so it was an organ piece, but we, arranged it for organ where you could, change different manuals and play with the pedals. And then a few weeks later, I'd gotten, practice enough and I was good enough at it. And he said, do you want to try playing it for the service on Sunday? And I said, sure, I could try that out. I remember I was so nervous. All I had to do was play one pedal note, and it was just, I had to push it and hold it down. And I was so nervous to do that I couldn't actually keep it down. My foot was shaking so much. So, so that was the first time I ever played the organ in public. And I think I was in eighth grade at the time. And then I just kept practicing and eventually was able to play more than one note in a piece and with my feet, and just kept going from there. And so then by the time I graduated high school, I was interested in continuing studying the organ, applied to PC and got in and took organ lessons all 4 years while I was there. And I maybe I'll say this anyway, but the peak day of organ performance that I'll probably ever have was on April 15th, 2015, when I had my senior recital in St. Dominic Chapel. But I remember that year I'd practiced so much for this recital. I was practicing consistently, several hours per day to, be in peak performance for my senior recital. And I do say that was the best I'll ever play the organ, because I don't think there'll ever come a time in my life where I'll be spending multiple hours every single day practicing the organ. That's not to say that I haven't gotten better in some senses. I've gotten better at sight reading because I do play for churches on Sundays. And most Sundays now, I'm just a free agent sub and just go around playing. I also play at Stanford during the academic year. We have a 9 p.m. mass on campus, and I'm in charge of playing the organ for that and leading the choir. So during the academic year, I have a regular organ playing gig, and the Stanford organ's not too shabby either. So it's a lot of fun to play it in Memorial Church on campus.
So how did you balance your kind of hard science background and your creative music side? Did it help to be on these kind of parallel tracks, or?
I'll start by saying that maybe I don't recommend taking the two of the most time intensive majors at PC that PC offers. I think they're in terms of like time per credit, you think that you have all these labs that you get 1 credit for and you have to take with each of your classes. And then you have all of these rehearsals that you have to go to as a music major, and you go and get 1 credit for it. And then you have ear training, and which also is attached to a music theory class that you have to take. And so I was taking a lot of classes, let's just say that, and my day was very scheduled. But on the flip side, I really enjoyed that. I enjoyed having that structured time and having that structured switch too between going from a lab for an entire afternoon to going to e-cantori rehearsal in the evening, for instance, and just being able to put science aside for a couple hours and just sing in a choir rehearsal, or not have to think about music for several hours while working on an experiment in the lab in the afternoon, or studying for a PChem exam, for instance. So anyway, I enjoyed having both, and it worked for me. But I can see that there were definitely pros and cons to it. I wish I had the chance to study abroad, for instance, but that didn't work out with the 2 majors I had.
Well, I'm hoping that at some point your research, you'll get to present your research at a conference that'll take you abroad. Maybe not a whole semester's length, but
not going to be for a semester's length, but yeah, I did manage to go abroad. I did a solo, not solo, but a backpacking trip through Europe after graduating for about a month and a half. So I got my travel in.
Did you get to play in any?
It wasn't PC structured.
Did you get to play in any organs while you were in Europe?
Unfortunately, no. One of my best friends, who also was an organist, James Broder, class of 2014, he came with me for a few weeks too, and it was our goal to try and play at least one organ, but we weren't able to weasel our way in any of the churches that we visited, unfortunately.
Eric, I think
we tried.
This is bucket list for you now, right? You've
it
got
really
to get
is,
to
yeah. Play an organ in Europe.
Eric, it's been wonderful chatting with you today. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you for having me, Liz. It's been great.
Subscribe to the Providence College podcast in all the usual places, including iTunes, SoundCloud, Stitcher, Google Play, and Spotify, as well as your smart speaker. If you like what you hear, please review and share with others. Thanks for listening, and go Friars.